on the BetQL network.
We roll along this Saturday night. Appreciate you checking us out with BT. I'm the Sports Machine. We were friends, now we're foes as we fight here on the radio. Segment's called "You Gonna Fight Me." Last time we saw Tank in the ring, talking a little boxing now, he beat Ryan Garcia. You gonna fight me if I say I kind of hope we see that fight again one day?
Not going to fight you. I think that would definitely be a fun matchup. Be interesting to see what weight they would do it at, because Ryan Garcia has shown he doesn't really care about weight, and he is a lot bigger than Gervonta Davis. But they're still two of the biggest stars. I wouldn't mind it being still a couple of years down the road after, Ryan figures out whatever the hell he's got to figure out and get some time away. But no, I think you have two names that big. It's possible to make the fight. I'd absolutely love to see it again. And Ryan's name's obviously never been bigger, even with the loss to Tank.
We will get much more into the Tank Davis fight tonight versus Frank Martin. The odds, who's going to win, how they're going to win, if Tank's going to knock him out. We'll get into all that stuff a little bit later as the show rolls on. Last time when Tank beat Ryan Garcia by TKO, him and mainly his crew declared Tank to be the face of boxing. You're going to fight me if I say the face of boxing is still Canelo Alvarez?
Yeah, not going to fight you on that. I think that Canelo still garners the event that he garners for a fight week, no matter who he fights, is still something special. It was cool experiencing it like firsthand for the first time. I've never been to a Canelo fight, and it was nuts. I mean, it was nuts just seeing how Vegas turns out. Now, I'm sure they do for Tank too. The last Tank I was at was he was on undercard, so I've never been to a headline Tank card. But he's the thing with Tank is he's been able to take his show on the road and fill a lot of buildings. I don't know how much that's translated to pay-per-view buys when it's not Ryan Garcia. I'm curious to see what business does tonight, because this does have David Benavidez in the co-main, so it's a pretty stacked card, all things considering. But he's up there. He's not the face of boxing, but I'd say he's top 5 right now.
Speaking of David Benavidez, you talked to him earlier on this week. We'll get a chance to hear that interview with David Benavidez coming up a little bit later on in the show. Back to Canelo for a second. There's actually somewhat breaking news. This is just kind of coming down the pipelines that him and his team have somewhat agreed to a handshake deal to fight Bud Crawford. You're going to fight me if I say now I think that fight really is going to happen probably within the next year.
Yeah, I mean, like there's been a lot of talk from Turki Al-Sheikh, the Saudi, who's been putting together all these great cards. He's a huge boxing fan. He's trying to like unify boxing. So if you told me what was more likely to happen, him versus David Benavidez or him versus Crawford, I mean, Crawford made more sense just because, first of all, I think it's a bigger fight and it is a less dangerous fight for Canelo. Crawford, I think Terrence can beat him, but I don't think Terrence can hurt him. And I think that Canelo, the only thing he really sat on here is he thought he wasn't going to get any credit for anything or whatnot. I don't think that's true. I think people know how good Terrence Crawford is and know that Canelo's had trouble with some really skilled boxers. So I'm very fascinated to see what the odds are for this fight. I'm still probably going to bet Bud just because I feel like he's going to end up the dog. But if that does happen, man, I mean, you couldn't get me more jacked up for a fight. That one is such a cool clash of styles and size and all that type of stuff. It should be really, really fun.
Are we sure Benavidez wins tonight?
I'm pretty confident that he's going to win. He seems, Vocek is really solid. He is coming up in weight to 175, Benavidez. I think that's only going to benefit him because he was a really big 168er anyway. And he was talking about, in the couple of times I got to talk to him in the lead up about this, just that he just thinks his endurance is going to be that much more. And he's more of a second half fighter anyway. So I just think for Vocek, he got stopped by Artur Beterbiev in this weight class. I think that this could be, even though he's gotten better from that fight, I still think that Benavidez may show some signs of like hesitancy early on, but I like him for a late stoppage.
I actually just bet that fight to go the distance. Funny you say that. Brendan Tobin, Sports Machine Sean Levine here. Talk a little fighting on the BetQL network. Again, hear from David Benavidez a little bit later on in the show. Let's get back into the UFC conversation where Conor McGregor is officially out in his fight against Michael Chandler at UFC 303 in Vegas. You're going to fight me if I say Conor's most memorable moment is knocking out Jose Aldo. But I think Conor's most memorable fights are pretty much the fights that he lost. In order, I would say the most memorable fight for me, probably Nate Diaz won. Obviously, he avenged it in the second fight and won. And then his loss to Khabib. There's a lot of great ones in there also, but I think I'll remember Conor moment Aldo fight, probably Nate Diaz won.
I'll fight you a little bit. I think that the moment he knocks out Jose Aldo, like you call it a moment because that's how long the fight lasted. Like it wasn't,
exactly. Yeah.
But it's just such a star-making performance. Eddie Alvarez, I mean, that was so cool. The way that he perfected that. Eddie was, still had a lot of gas in the tank. This man was a Bellator champ, UFC champ, and he really diced through him like nothing. And then, even Chad Mendez, I remember a lot of these just go back vividly because these are like, Conor McGregor, I'm at a bar, things are packed, everybody's there to see it. Everybody's so excited.
Yes.
So, I still go by his wins, but I mean, yeah, there's been a ton of crazy moments, honestly, like with the Khabib fight. I almost remember the antics outside the fight more so than the fight itself with, jumping the octagon, him throwing the dolly at the bus, all that stuff.
No, that was insane. Like that's one of those things, kind of like the Malice at the Palace, where they don't program directors don't particularly like you saying how much you like sports fights. But let's be honest, that was awesome. It's like when Jermaine O'Neal was throwing punches and Ron Artest, when Khabib jumped over the side of the octagon. That was pretty awesome television to watch and very memorable, no doubt about that. Speaking of Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier trolling him a little bit. And by the way, Dustin Poirier has kind of got the last laugh here, BT, your guy, because remember going into that fight, Conor was talking a lot of smack about his wife and talking about how he was going to kill him and put him in the cemetery and do all these different things. And as it turned out, Conor broke his ankle. Conor ended up technically getting knocked out. Conor ended up getting taken out on a stretcher. And now Conor has to delay being a main event, at least for a while. Like, Poirier might not say it either, but he's got to be loving this.
I'm sure he's got to. And not only that, there's not a lot of love lost between him and Chandler either. So the fact that Chandler still has to sit by and sit on the sidelines. Look, Dustin's been in that situation, right? Like he chose the Conor fight over fighting for the championship initially. He knows the issues that come with it, but this is obviously hit a next level because of Conor's injury. But yeah, there's no doubt Dustin has to be in his private moments where he's coming up with his new hot sauce flavor. There's no doubt that he's got to be laughing at this because of where Conor's at right now. Because I would say him knocking out Conor, even though Conor had a win on him, those two fights, I mean, they definitely did put Dustin into a different stratosphere. Like the way the fans react to him, the way he's been solidified as a Hall of Famer. I don't think those do happen without the Conor victories.
I mean, yeah, knocked out Conor McGregor. That was a wild sight to see. We've seen Conor lose before. Haven't really seen him get knocked out like that. Dustin Poirier also said that his plan was to retire had he won his fight at UFC 302. You're going to fight me if I say, and obviously this is his choice, health first. I wouldn't do it. That guy's got plenty of gas left in the tank. He might not ever get a chance to fight for a title.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to fight for a title either outside of like something surprising, like he gets to step in last minute to fight somebody else again that's not Islam. Like if Islam ends up losing the title to Sarukian and somebody gets hurt, yeah, some factors like that. But climbing the ladder again is going to be tough for him. I just think he's too good to retire. But I think if I'm him, I am sitting back and I am relaxing and laying in the weeds until the perfect matchup comes in there. And I don't know what exactly that looks like yet. I don't know if that's a Max Holloway rematch or getting back in there for a Gaethje trilogy or whatever. I'm not really sure what that fight is, but I'm sitting back at this point if I'm Dustin Poirier. And the way that they've been more willing to do non-title main events for pay-per-views, I'm sitting back and I'm sure there's just something that's going to come at my front door that gets me going and will make him want to fight again, because I do think that he's admitted it's going to be tough for him to walk away, but I don't think that he does the rat race of like fighting guys in the rankings or taking on a Benoit Saint Denis who's like 10th in the rankings. Like, I think he's done with that. I think for right now, it's just crazy fights that are like the fans want to see it. Like that's what I'd do if I'm Dustin. Other than that, just sit on the sidelines.
Well, why not then from both sides? Why doesn't he fight Max?
I don't know. I mean, like, I think right now Max is probably going to fight for the title, I would guess.
True. Yeah, Max has bigger fish.
I mean,
right.
I don't know when Max is going to get back in there. Obviously, he just fought at UFC 300, and so did and Pereira did too. So Pereira's coming back on the same timeline. But yeah, I was like, well, what's the fight that they could really do that would have gotten everybody geeked up for it? I really thought it was probably Max versus Sean O'Malley. Like, I thought that would have been like a cool Hail Mary, but I didn't know what their status was for any of this stuff. But no, look, I think he's probably going to wait until the Topuria shot at the belt, and if he can become champion again, then he gets to be etched in stone as maybe the back to being the best featherweight of all time. Who knows? But I think that's probably what he's waiting on right now, is just title shot.
We're in a weird spot right now, BT, because you were just talking about how we don't have a lot of the fighters that everybody loves watching because of injuries. And also we've got these guys that we're talking about in a Poirier and a Max Holloway. And even for the sake of this conversation, if he was to come back and win, Conor McGregor, Sean O'Malley, there's so many different fights. Most of the time, like in the case of John Jones, what I'm trying to say is it pretty much feels like his next fight's either never going to happen in the UFC or it's going to be against Stipe and vice versa. Right? We know who most of these guys are going to be fighting. It's Nate Diaz. If he comes back, he's probably going to at some point fight Conor McGregor, these type of things. It feels like in the case of Sean O'Malley, after the Merab fight, let's say he wins, there's like 10 different options for him. Max Holloway, after being the BMF, 5 fights make sense. If Conor was to win, I can think of 4 off the top of my head that would be absolute super fights. Just kind of a unique time for the sport, because I've been talking about for months now that we need some more superstars on the women's side. Right? My girl, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the Boogie Woman, is gone. And Thug Rose isn't what she used to be. And Amanda Nunes is retired. And Ronda's retired. Just kind of a weird time for the UFC.
Yeah, because you could argue, I mean, honestly, how many of those big fights really need a championship on the line, right? Like, the belt used to be really everything in the UFC. And now it's like the heavyweight title is not really the heavyweight title because it's the interim heavyweight title. And you know, what do people care about more? Do they care about Aspinall or do they care about John Jones? And who do they really look upon as the champion? You know, it's a strange time in that I don't necessarily know you need to put on the line champion, just because I think some of the more popular fighters aren't necessarily champions right now. They're either BMF champions or they're just longtime veterans. So it is an interesting time. There's no doubt about that. An interesting time. It's not a bad time, but I do think that they're living off the brand a little bit, and that kind of goes back to the Pereira thing, because I really think Pereira really could be one of the faces of the UFC. You know, I've spoken like with John Anik about it. Like, John swears like, hey, the fan reaction he gets, he's like a huge star, but it does feel like because his last 2 title fights have been surrounded by really bad circumstances. A promised super fight at 300, and now the lost Conor fight, he's almost getting undercut on that, and he probably shouldn't, because he's maybe the most, dangerous puncher in the sport.
The problem is, BT, and I feel like such a jerk saying it, but also I feel like it has to be mentioned, he doesn't speak English, and he isn't really attempting, maybe at the same level as some other guys to. Let's not pretend like that isn't important. Like, part of the reason why O'Malley and McGregor and a lot of these guys become who they are, Chael Sonnen, who's fighting later on tonight against Anderson Silva boxing match. We'll get into that. That's what these guys do. If you don't talk at all to an entire American audience, it's tough.
I get what you're saying, and I'm not totally disagreeing with you because it's a part of it, but I think that his knockouts are so good. Like, Francis spoke English, but not like he wasn't, sitting here riffing off promos. Like, his promos were vicious knockouts. And I think that's what Pereira's is too. I think he's been the victim of bad timing with these main events. even though he should be complimented because he's stepping in to save these things.
Speaking of stepping in to save a fight, somebody had to step in next week for Hamzat Chimaev in Saudi Arabia. I'll tell you who that guy is that will be fighting against Robert Whitaker, what the odds are, and what the odds are for the entire card. Because I got a couple of Levine's locks for you next Saturday in Saudi coming up next right here on the BetQL Network.